Jingzong, a piece completed on the seventh night to express my feelings. After 1 year of disappointment, I sigh over the long separation. On this seventh night, restrained, we speak of reunion. So lightly, in silk stockings, you step through heaven's gleam. So brightly, newly made up, you mirror the moon's splendor. Love-pained, as you coyly smile, dimples appear, not hesitating to reveal as you undo your cloud gown. We sigh that we must follow the clepsydra's deadline, covering our tears as you return to work your loom of past nights. Okay, so today we have a poem, as we mentioned, by Jingzong. Jingzong is a poet of the Early Tang, basically of the early 7th century. Yeah, and he is one of the typical court poets of this period of the 630s, 640s, like Shang Wanji. And like most of the poets of the anthology, he was pretty successful. He passed an examination, which was not yet the Qixi, during the Shui dynasty, and later he served under the first Tang emperors. He was in the retinue of the second emperor of Taizong, and he served also in the court of his successor, Gaozong, where he distinguished himself as a partisan, as a strong supporter of Empress Wu Zetian. And so he ended up occupying, very important posts as Grand Counselor and even being ennobled as a duke. So, pretty successful politician. As a poet, he doesn't have, as far as I'm aware, of a very, very good reputation, a very important reputation. Stephen Owen, for example, mentions him by name in his book, The Early Tang, but not one poem of his is quoted there. There's only about 30 poems of his that have survived. And as I said, his poetry, as you might have already seen from the example we read, is very, very, very representative, very typical of the early Tang poetry. Remember, this poetry was court poetry. Lots of the poems were composed at imperial command for outings or pleasure banquets or other events at the court. They were celebratory. Sometimes they were made to rhyme with another person's poems. So it was a very courtier type of poetry, very, very conventional, with more or less enforced positive subject matter, very restricted diction, very restricted topics, very artificial from certain points of view, but also very amateurish in the sense that it wasn't poetry really composed by, for the most part, by people who were professional poets, but rather by people who were courtiers and also poets, and were supposed to, be very good at improvising a poem and composing one, even if it wasn't particularly deep. This early Tang poetry was, in many respects, it was practically the same as like the poetry that had been composed in the late years and in the middle years of the period of disunion. So it had this aesthetic element, not very moralistic. Topics are generally superficial or even frivolous. Not very descriptive of social events or events outside the palace and the courtly world. And later poets of a more Confucian persuasion would castigate this poetry as decadent, frivolous, and irrelevant. So this is a very good example of this. So this is a poem on a topic that we've encountered time and time again, which is a 7th day, 7th month. That's a feast, Qixi, in China, or it's called Tanabata in Japan. And it was part of the calendar of annual festivals in Extreme Orient, which generally tended to focus a lot on double days, like first day, first month, third day, third month, fourth day, fourth month, seventh day, seventh month, ninth day, ninth month, the doubles. Yeah, because they are doubly charged with the Jing or Jiang energy, and you probably have to do different rituals and festivities to exercise possible negative influences. So this poem, again, we've encountered at least 3 or 4 in the videos that I've already made where the topic was Qixi. And just to recapitulate, The legend about Qixi is that there's these two stars, which I think are Altair and Vega, which appear on the horizon close to each other in early autumn, perhaps. And in Chinese legends, the two stars are associated and are named as the weaving girl and the herder boy. And allegedly they were lovers, and but they were afterwards punished because they spent too much time together, and they were cursed by the ruler of heaven to be only able to meet once a year, the night of the seventh day of the seventh month. That's the only night they can spend together, and the rest of the year they are separated by the Milky Way, which looks like a bridge in heaven. And that night, well, some access between one side and the other is made possible. Sometimes the imagery is of a bridge of magpies that allows them to get together. So the topic, is a romantic topic, and it's very appropriate for romantic poetry, whether deeply felt or whether just superficially adopted as a poetic persona for the creation of a poem with a pathetic, emotionally charged feeling. Yeah, so like lovers that are apart and that get together. That's the topic of this poem. It's describing the meeting of the herder boy and the weaving girl, and it's describing both their desire and their sadness and angst at separation, but also their enjoying the time together. So the topic is love and the meeting of these celestial lovers. There is an element which really harks back to the poetry of the six dynasties of the period of this union, in that it's a poem that mainly focuses on a voyeuristic description of a beautiful lady that can be, made parallel to, like the typical Taoist goddesses or concubines or imperial consorts in the harem. There's this beautiful lady in a luxurious surrounding. Here, instead of having an outside gaze of a male, you have an inside gaze, because it's the herder boy who at last sees and joins his lady. And there's a very subdued but evident eroticism in both the description of the female beauty and on the implied pleasures of the night spent together by the herder boy and the weaving girl. So very refined, very elegant, very indirect. This is the type of poetry that is so typical of the Southern dynasties and of the Early Tang. So, the poem, the Early Tang still hadn't quite developed or crystallized the form of the regulated poem of the Qixi. But this one, on the face of it, looks like a Qixi. It's heptasyllabic. Lines are 7 characters. There's 8 lines, just like in a Qixi. And the middle 2 couplets are parallelistic. But then again, lots of Chinese poetry before the regulations of the Tang, of regulated verse, was already parallelistic. But you could. I don't know enough Chinese not to be fooled by looking at the translation and the Chinese graphs and not thinking, okay, yeah, this looks like a parallelistic poem, the typical regulated poem. Okay, so as usual, let's go couplet by couplet. Couplet number 1. After 1 year of disappointment, I sigh over the long separation. On this 7th night restrained, we speak of reunion. Okay, so the first couplet, as usual, gives us the time and the place. This is 7th day, 7th night. The poetic persona, the speaker, the voice in the poem is the herder boy. So he starts by evoking the year-long separation that has come very briefly to an end tonight. And after this 1 year of separation and sighing and sadness, now we are together. We're still restrained. Perhaps this restrained feeling comes from, from all this pent-up expectation for this night. But now, at last, we are together and we can speak of our meeting and enjoy our love and our company. So the first poem locates us, not so much in space here. Well, this is a mythological poem, so its space would be the heavens, but in time. This is Tanavata, this is Qixi, and the 2 stars are meeting. So the next couplets 2 and 3, basically describe the beautiful weaving girl. Couplet 2. So lightly in silk stockings you step through heaven's gleam. so brightly, newly made up, you mirror the moon's splendor. So, as is typical in these poems, like the new poems from the Jade Terrace of the Sixth Dynasties, you get the description of a beautiful woman surrounded by beautiful objects. So this is a woman in the heavens. She's wearing silk stockings. Her hair and her makeup have been newly made, and she's beautiful. She mirrors the moon. All images of light, mirroring the moon's splendor, going through heaven's gleam, lightly, brightly. So images of light, of beauty, of shininess. Yeah. So she is walking around in her newly worn clothes and coiffure, and she's looking gorgeous. Yeah, she's beautiful. Her outfit and her makeup, her physical appearance is beautiful. Next couplet, it zooms in more into the next couplet. The third couplet zooms in into the feelings and also introduces in a very oblique way the pleasures of the night that are about to follow. Love pained, as you coyly smile, dimples appear, not hesitating to reveal as you undo your cloud gown. So she is taking off her clothes, and she's not hesitating. She loves the herder boy. There's still this bitter sweetness because both participants know that they can only meet for this night, and there is a pain at the separation, but this pain makes the beloved look even more beautiful. Dimples appear on her coy smile, and both the coyness of the smile, the gown falling down voyeuristically is introducing the pleasures of the night, as I said. But because this is a courtly poem, no more details will be given. Just after these brief brushstrokes, the next and last couplet jumps away, just like a cat out from a classical 1950s or 60s Hollywood movie. We get the cat out from the pleasure. And finally, the last couplet connects back. Well, the last couplet of a poem like this usually summarizes and takes the story to an end. If it's like a poem describing an encounter like this one, it evokes a feeling and maybe a message. That is the synthesis of the whole poem's emotional tone and maybe story. We sigh that we must follow the clepsydra's deadline, covering our tears as you return to work your loom of past nights. So the poem ends with the sadness at the imminent end of the pleasure. The clepsydra is the water clock, which is a typical clock of Tang times. So the lovers are enjoying each other, but yet they remember that time will run out and that they will each have to part their ways again for another year. So as I said, altogether, it's a very representative example of court poetry and of its style. And again, one more addition to the Qixi poems that we've been reciting and reading in previous videos.